Never had less of an idea of what to say after class than today. This has been a kind of a strange week, and I don't have a lot of perspective about it, but it in some ways ties into the Gestalt, the larger environmental universe that we all inhabit. In a certain way, it's because it doesn't all make sense. And not making sense seems to be part of the way things are unfolding. That sense is not the security that it once was. That, oh, I get it, that makes sense. I was walking down the stairs the other day, and I said to myself, these stairs could be dangerous. And at the bottom step, I fell. Ended up in the hospital with X-rays of my foot and crutches and all of that, and going And I'd had this feeling for some months before that my walking exercise program has gotten kind of exaggerated and obsessive, close to 2.5 or 3 hours a day of walking and biking, and then added to that. The whole story is kind of boring, but some physical therapy exercises at the hospital for a neck problem. And so it's like the universe is really saying, I don't know what it's saying, that just stop exercising so much. Although it seems to me still to be an important thing to do. And I'm still biking, which I can do. Last night we went to drop off some food for Blanche's horse at the horse ranch, and the sky was a little orange, kind of strange. And as we drove on to the property, we noticed that the main house was on fire. And it was like so surreal, and I really didn't know what to do. And I saw people running out of the house, people screaming, "Do you have the dogs? Do you got it?" And I'm not one of those people normally who would run into the house, into a burning fire, although everyone kept saying, everybody's okay, and so I just got on my phone and called 911, and meanwhile Blanche is trying to get the horse's stuff delivered, and I'm watching a house almost burned to the ground in front of me. I'm going, and the woman whose house it was just screaming and yelling and crying and falling on the ground, and people were trying to comfort her. And I'm going, boy, oh boy, it's like the world's on fire. And if it's not on fire in some metaphorical way, literally it was on fire in front of me. And it may not have been the whole world, but it might as well have been. And we hung around, and Blanche tried to help her, but she had other helpers who were more important, the woman who owned the house. And fire engines were slow to come in my mind, but they did come. And by the time we left, I never saw anything burn so fast. I never saw a house consumed like that. It was like the top floor just suddenly became the bottom floor, and explosions of stuff. And I just knew it was deeply unsettling and deeply important to witness. And we went shopping to prepare for class today. And the unnaturalness of just going shopping while someone's house had burned down, and there was nothing we could do. We were truly kind of bystanders and offered the help we could. And even when I called 911, I was not the first person to do so. So, you look around you, and all these things are going on, and then I'm not going to talk politics with this particular group of people, but I do share it with other people, and there is something disappearing in the world that's kind of called coherence, truth, agreed upon reality. I mean, it's truly, truly unusual moment in our time, and maybe in all time, but I didn't live that I can remember in other times, so I can't compare it to anything else. But I am left with this thing of what is the best way to be in a world that is losing its center or its coherent nature. Of course, not everything is. There's still a lot of things that are seemingly normal. The sun comes up and goes down, and things we can rely upon. But there's a lot of things that are not as reliable as we might like them to be, and certainly they are projected to become less so, if only in a climatological sense. Things are going to change. Societally, things are changing. Culturally, things are changing. And I play this role of a teacher. And I don't mean to limit it to a role, because I don't think of it as that. But I know in some ways I'm perceived as a teacher who sits here and talks and pontificates and maybe has something to offer. There are days, like when I was standing in front of the fire, where I realized I had nothing to offer. I really didn't. All I could do was observe it. And observe the suffering and the smoke and the beauty of it, to be honest. And the consuming nature right 100 yards away. And so I think, and rather continually I think about, what's my possible value in all of this? And I have to tell you, much of the time I don't have an answer. I really don't have one. And I feel stupid because I do sit here and do these talks, and I think sometimes people go, how do you guide us on this? And I try to think, what would Rudy have said or done at this point in time? And it's impossible to ask. I would like to ask Rudy about aging, because everyone I talk to who's getting old has no roadmap for aging. None of us know quite what's going on. None of us want to be part of that group that talks about your hospital visits and your MRIs and all of that stuff. That gets kind of boring. But we're all trying to sort of figure our way out, and I kept thinking, well, if Rudy was here, I could get some advice on all of that. So I don't know where advice comes from, but among other things, I'm a member of the Motion Picture Academy, and part of what I do at the end of every year is watch a lot of movies. More movies than I want to watch, movies that I don't think of as particularly worth my time. But I feel some responsibility to be part of the nominating process and part of the voting process. And that's my own choice. I don't need to. I could let it go. But I do it. And most of what I watch somewhat entertains. You know how I know if it entertains? Because I now watch them when I'm on the bicycle. And I'm going and going and going and going and going and going. And I go, if I remember I'm on the bicycle, it's a terrible movie. If I forget that I'm bicycling, I go, that was a great film. They really do transcend. Movies can get you out of your head, out of your mind, out of yourself. And some of the movies have been worthy and meaningful, but one of them, and not to say it's a great film, but it's a very good film, called Little Women, which I believe is opening maybe the next weekend. But in seeing Little Women, the one thing that came to me, kept coming to me through the movie, was that these girls had real lives. They were tricky. They loved each other and they hated each other, and they were there for each other, but they were not there for each other. They had jealousies and envies and all of these things, but mostly they were a family, with the father gone to the war and the mother having to work really hard to care for the girls, and at the same time helping other people because she had a goodness of heart. And what you felt watching the movie was, one, goodness of heart that went from mother to children and through into the community. And you watched people care about each other. And want to, in some ways, help each other, even when there was division and jealousy and all these other things. And the culmination of the film was they knew who they were through family and, more importantly, through community. And the word that has come back to me more than anything this week, in the middle of all these strange episodes, is community, and how vital it is. Most of us have, in our Western culture, families that have dispersed. I have much of my family on the West Coast. I have family in Detroit, family in Washington, D.C., and Atlanta. We are not who we were growing up. We don't have the kind of cohesion that gave meaning and value to the life that my parents had. My parents had family around, they had friends around. Much of their life they had children around until children left, but mostly they had that which gave continuity, comfort, meaning, places to go to connect. And connection, next to community, is the other word that I would use as really being at the core of this human journey. And now I'll take a spiritual leap, using the word connection. Because the one thing that seems to happen in the world is change and the loss of community and connection. We can reform community if we want to. If we do it consciously, we can create new community. And I think it's wise to do that. My gratitude for this community is beyond speaking, because I wake up on a Sunday morning not knowing if the community will form, and then I come into this room and there it is. People who I love being with. I love being in the space of people who are sitting here. There is an understanding and a connection that is so much greater than what I get just walking around, let's say, the downtown Red Hook. People are very nice to me. The MRI people were very nice to me. There was a real sense of goodness in everybody, but we don't cohere together. We just have momentary connection. This is a connection that is prolonged and can go very deep. And in the class itself, what I experience as a teacher is a level of connection that's deeper than anything I have with anyone else on the planet. I can't believe how open you are and how willing you are to let me, or this energy source, deepen itself, find paths into places that you have not even discovered yet, shine a light in those spaces so they become real to you, and then you can begin to expand your sense of self and become more connected to you, which allows for more connection outwardly. But it's the connection to you that is ultimately at the core of what is needed in this world. The connection to oneself is essential. And the biggest mistake people make in the material universe is they connect to their ego-minded bodily self. They establish a kind of love of the form, love of the body, love of the mind, love of the expression that they bring into the world through their clothes and their actions and their hairstyles and their way of having dialogues with people. But there's a sense of being a person that makes you feel connected to you, which is fine except for the fact that many of us aren't comfortable with us. We are fine up to a point. You're not fine because you don't have the right clothes to wear, because your hair is falling out, because hair is growing in places you didn't expect it to. Your bodily image suddenly is shifting and you don't know how or what to do about it. All of these connections to your physical, material, emotional self are shifting and are not providing the kind of solace and the kind of continuity of being that allows for joy in the world. Families and friends who you connected to, who were essential to that feedback of who am I and what am I, start to disperse. They have losses and fears and problems of their own, and you can't always totally rely on the community that you have around you, but you can do your best. Some communities last a lifetime, most do not. You take what you can get and you deepen it as deeply and much as fulfillingly as you can. You try to find the people around you who share something that's real, other than something that's divisive. You don't want to just share your anger. You don't want to just share your hostility. You don't want to just share your fears of the world. You want to share more than that. But community is also an external. Body-mind construct is external. The thing that you most would like to connect to and manage on occasion to do is yourself. How do you connect to the self that is somewhat divorced from how do I look? What do people think about me? What kind of presentation do I make? How much money do I have? How much display do I offer to the world that people feel comfortable liking me? How do you get past that? Well, I mean, I'm kind of preaching to the choir here, because we all know that the external self is changeable, transitory, and ultimately will be lost. It has no permanence. It is a temporary, evolving, changing, and ultimately decaying reality. That decay is really at the core of the questions I wanted to talk to Rudy about, because here I am watching the decay of my body, mind, memory, connections to the world and people. What do you do with it? And the only answer I find, and I think it's the one Rudy would have given me, is go deeper. Go deeper. Connect, connect, connect. And I do believe that has been the process and the practice and the essence of this particular lifetime. That I have gone deeper and deeper and deeper over the course of the 50 years that I have been sitting, and it found incredible reservoirs of availability, acceptance, oceanic kind of gratitude toward life and being. And I have really come to understand that this deep part of my being is reflected in the simple outer world that I inhabit, and that I inhabit two polarities. One of them is stillness, vastness, openness, beyond image of Bruce, beyond image of history and story and narrative, just this space, although it's not even locatable, of, you call it well-being, but let's get rid of the well and just make it being. That is one manifestation of this, and the other is community, the outer. The fact that we have each other, the fact that in the movie Little Women, these sisters had one another. They had, in the end, their husbands and their children, and they had their larger world. They had this thing that caused so much struggle and suffering and difficulty. But what the movie offered me, and I talk about it as a point of reference, not just trying to sell a movie, but what I got from it was how much I love life, and how much they loved their life, with all of the stuff of it, with all the drama and the insanity and the falling down stairs and houses on fire and all of the stuff that goes on. I love life. And I love life in its manifested form and all of the stuff that's going on. and I love being. And I love how being is the ground in which life arises. I love the fact that my studies with this practice, with Rudy, with the idea of sitting still, with the idea of opening to the what is, has allowed me not to disappear from the world and live in a world of unmanifested truth, which is, I suppose it's fine. It is a connection to the unmanifest. But at the same time, rising out of that for some inescapably, unbearably unknowable reason is this: we are alive. We are alive, moment to moment. Learning how to be alive, learning how to love your life is an ongoing process, because loving life when you're 4 years old is very different than loving life when you're 40 and when you're 104. My grandson lost his 2 front teeth for Christmas. And my son sent me a video this morning of him singing, "All I want for Christmas is my 2 front teeth." My 2 front teeth. I had such joy watching him singing that song, seeing these empty spaces and knowing that life at 4 is a lot simpler than life at 104. There are things that you lose beyond your 2 front teeth, including your entire mouthful of teeth in your father's case. And you know, there's a lot of journeying around here to learn how to be alive and how to learn. But you start to lose and you start to gain. And what you lose from life almost always has a strange kind of gain to it. Elijah's teeth are going to come in, they call them permanent teeth if you take care of them, shortly. And we'll create a new mouth in a way, and the new sort of child, man, person that he's going to become. And our loss of all of our teeth, let's say, when that happens, the loss of the familiar, the old patterns of being are changeable, but what starts to replace it is something else. And I'm just beginning to really fully understand it, if understand is the word, but part of it is I find myself sitting still a lot. Just like I sit in a chair and I just sit. Or I sit on the front porch and I find total contentment. I'm not doing anything. I'm not planning a future. I don't have ideas of what to do in an hour or tomorrow. I'm just I'm surprised by how much I like that. And I'm surprised when I talk to a lot of old people who tell me the same thing. They like just sitting. Now, you all know I've cultivated a very real love for ice cream, because you don't get a lot of sweets as you get older. A lot of sweet things are kind of past tense. But you can always have a little bit of ice cream. You can't eat a carton. You have to know that there is a real limit to what you can allow yourself. But you can have little indulgences along the way. You might be able to sleep a little later, unless they're working outside your window and building your house, which wakes you up very early in the morning. But then you have this wonderful feeling of there are all these people working on your house. And it's very joyful. And my friend told me when they stop working, you're going to feel really sad. And I realized that's the next step. Sadness when they depart. And that's what we call life. The arrival of things and the departure. The joy of having, the sadness of losing. That's it. And love of life is not just loving the arrival. Love of life is feeling the going away, the loss. Love of life is being alive. When I was a kid, I probably have told this story before. I was working at the World's Fair in New York. And I was selling hot dogs and beer and stuff like that. And there was a pavilion called the Johnson's Wax Pavilion, and it showed a movie called To Be Alive. And a guy named Francis Thompson was the writer, and it was a movie that was on 3 screens, although it starts on one screen and becomes Cinerama-like. And you sit in an eggshell in a series of seats, and you're lifted up into this eggshell, which is the entirety of the screen. And this movie comes on, and it's just people being alive, right? You know, marriage, birth, death, being with your grandpa on a boat, catching fish. And I would run to see this movie on my lunch break, and I would go up into this shell, and I would watch this movie, and there's a moment where it says, "To be alive is a wonderful thing," and I would break into tears. And then the shell would come down, and everybody would get off except me, because I wanted another ride up into the shell. And I would do this almost every day. And the idea to be alive, I thought if I was ever going to make movies in my life, that's the only thing I would want to get at. The joy and the wonder of being alive. And I just as a coda to that story, many years later, I worked with Francis Thompson for a short period of time and told him about how much I loved that movie. And he gave me a private screening in his screening room in his office in New York City. And then Joshua, for my 70th birthday, took me to the Johnson's Wax Corporation in Minnesota, and they're still playing that film. And I got to see that there. But all it does is it reinforces what I'm saying, which is something we all kind of feel, which is to be alive is a wonderful thing. And that the journey in spiritual terms just into unmanifested being, into this core space of self, is not, in my mind, the totality of this ride. The totality of this ride involves being manifest and unmanifest at the same time. We are very lucky. And I will tell you, the deeper you go into the connectivity to yourself and to the joy of just being, the more of that reflects back into the manifested world, where you walk around in a state of awe and wonder and fear and terror and joy and expectation and all of that stuff that the little women had in that film and that book. They were alive. We are alive. I think it really has to be balanced out. If you're just here caught in the strangeness of this particular manifested moment, you're going to get lost in anger and annoyance and frustration and fear of the future and all of those things that happen. And the only way not to do that is to make sure you balance it out with your root system based deeply, deeply in the core undercurrent of who you are, the self, being itself. So spiritual life, if you want to call it that, is the balancing factor. It's love, being, and let that love of being reflect itself into even the craziest of worldly moments. And then take that craziness and bring it back into the love of being and keep nurturing both. Keep nurturing the world. And if we have a role to play as a group, I would use the words community, connection, and deepen that connection so that this community can feel your comforting force, your comforting self in the midst of toxicity and turbulent times. You become a quiet, grounding force that hugs people and knows, yes, I don't have the answers, but I have myself. And I have this wonder of being that we are all sharing. And if we can just come together in community, hug each other, help each other, recognize each other, be there for each other, we will have all we can do in this world. This is going to be a very interesting time that we're going through. It's really interesting, and we're already aware of that. And you know, you can get fearful about it, you can get hopeful, you can get ambitious, you can get, head in the sand, whatever your personal reaction is to turbulence and change. But all I can tell you, go deep, find the foundation that you can stand on, bring that power of simple being into the forces of life itself, and filter through into the world where people are suffering the love and the connection and the joy of the community you create. That's what we're here for. And if you can do that, we will have an exquisite appreciation, even of a difficult and painful time. But you will still be grateful, I think, to be alive. Any questions? Thank you.